Hi class, it's Bill Berry with a continuing and final video in our first course orientation Intro to Programming series for JavaScript. We are just about done, have just a couple more topics. We've covered a lot of ground, kind of background information. We learned in the first video a little bit about languages and how they work, how they compile and interpret. We looked in our second video at writing a first basic JavaScript and understanding some basic things about HTML. In our third video, we covered a little more detail about the language, what JavaScript was, and what some of the very basic building blocks were, like literals and comparison operators and some important stuff like that. So now we're ready to kind of wrap this up and talk about just some last things that'll help kind of set the stage for the work that will come next. So I'm going to jump forward to a video that's, a slide that's a little bit into the deck, and we're going to talk about functions and methods and give you a quick introduction to how those things work. The thing that we'll need here is we will be using a lot of functionality that is provided by the language. The language has a lot of built-in stuff that we want to use that keeps us from having to do all of the hard work ourselves, and that's great. It has a lot of bits of code, little bits of JavaScript or whatever it is in the background, we don't care, but it's code that's provided, and all we have to do is mention the name of the thing that we want to run, and it will call it or invoke it, and it will go and do its thing. So that's very convenient, right? There's a lot of stuff that's provided, you just have to use the right name and it'll do its thing. Now, when we do that, very often they're going to be parameters, and parameters are things that we pass to the function when we call it. We pass data to the function. We'll have a lot more analogies about that and a lot more exploration of that when we start writing our own functions, but that's going to be a little while. So for now, just remember, this is data that you're passing in. You're saying, hey, I want to run this function, I want to go do this thing, and here's some data that I want to give to it so that it can do its work. So that's an important little piece of information there. The other thing is sometimes those things, very often those things give us data back. So we pass it something, it does some work, and then it gives us something back, and those are called returns or return values. So we can give it something, it can do some work, and it can give us back a return. The other thing that's important is that there are always parentheses when we talk about these functions. We always put the name of the function and then we put parentheses. We put the parentheses even if there are no parameters to the function. So just get in the habit of every time you type the name of one of these things, you're just going to automatically follow it with open and close parens, and then you come back and fill it in if that's appropriate. So here are some examples of things we might do. For instance, we might call capital math. Now remember, this is all has to be capitalized exactly this way. Capital M math dot lowercase random. That says, hey, I'm calling a math function called random, and it's going to give me back a random number that is between 0 and not quite 1. The second one is an example with one parameter, and that is if I want to round a number that it has some decimals in it, and I want to round it to the closest integer, I can call math.round. I pass it whatever that number is with the decimal digits, and it will automatically round that and give us back a 5, right? Because 4.5 rounds up to 5. Another sample, math.floor. Floor goes downward, right? Doesn't round up or down, it always goes down. So the floor of 4.5 would be 4. But here's an example with more parameters. There's one called math.max, and you can pass it as many parameters as you like. So if we call math.max and we pass it 3.6, comma 2.4, comma 1.1, it will return 3.6 because it says, hey, out of the ones you gave me, 3.6 is the biggest one. Notice that if we have multiple parameters, we separate them with a comma. You don't have to put a space next to it, but human eyes find it a little easier to read, so I would recommend a space, but it doesn't matter whether you leave a space there or not. It's a free-form language, so you can kind of get away with spacing things in various different ways. So those are functions, and we're not going to give you a complete list of them or anything, but I'm just telling you we're going to use a lot of functions. Some of them need parameters, some of them have returns, etc. So let's explore just the very next step for how this thing works. When you do something like document.write, and then let's say you call the math.max function and you pass it these things. How exactly does that work? Well, the first thing is it has to see that this has to be done first. You notice this is inside the parentheses, and the things that are farthest into the parentheses are going to be done first. So it knows that the function has to be called and the parameters passed. So this is going to call math.max, and it's going to hand it these three values. Then, wherever that code is, it runs and it determines out of that set which is the maximum of those values. It knows that that's 3.6, so it returns that value. Now, the magic here is the 3.6 is going to take the place of this entire thing. So it's as if the 3.6 magically is replacing that whole thing. So it's as if you had said document.write 3.6, and then the document.write will proceed. So notice it evaluates this expression, comes up with the result, replaces that with the result, and then proceeds with the next thing that's farther out in the parentheses, or the next thing in the order of precedence. So that's how function calls work. That's how parameters are passed in, how return values are used, and then you can use this anywhere that you could use the number 3.6. So notice you could use this whole expression, math.max, this whole function call, any place that you could use a 3.6. I know that that's a little bit, maybe a lot of information at the moment, but we do that quite often, so it's something that we'll practice. We'll use it quite often, and you'll see a little more about that when we learn to write our own functions, but that's going to be a little while, so don't worry about it too much. Just go over that. Now there's another slide that tries to encapsulate that in text, but I'm not going to talk about that because I've sort of already talked about it. So watch that again if you'd like. Pause the video if you want to read the text and see how it matches the slide before. All right, we're going to skip the challenges because we'll do those in class. So let's move forward just a little bit. Let me find the next slide of interest. One other little bitty detail that your brain is not quite ready for, but since we're in the area of talking about functions, I want to give you one more little thing to file away, and we'll come back to it in a future day. Functions and methods are kind of the same thing. We sort of use them interchangeably in some languages, but here let's talk about a specific way that we can think about functions and methods and how they're different. A function, as I mentioned before, is just a little bit of standalone code, and it's something that, in our case, the language already knows about, or maybe something we write. We can write functions if we like, but it is called by using its name. So if we have a function, which we do, called prompt, we can call it by simply using its name, and then we pass it some stuff, right? We pass it some parameters. We don't care what they are at the moment. We'll talk about this later. So that's what a function looks like. But sometimes it's like we use a function, but we precede it by a dot, and then there's something else in front of it. If there's something else in front of it, and then we put a dot, and then we use what looks like a function name, those have special names. Instead of a function, we tend to call those a method. A method just means that we are using an object or a class in front of the name of the function, because the function is part of that thing, right? You think of it as a library, or it's an object. We have a math thing, whatever it is, and we're calling random, which is part of that math thing. So if you see something like that, and notice we've already seen something like that, we used document.write. So that gives us a clue. When you see a dot between things like that, and it's not a number with a decimal, you can be sure that that's going to be having to do with an object, and then you put the dot, and then you put the name of the function. So again, not a really important distinction for us at the moment, but again, setting the stage, and it's a good place to note this since we're talking about functions and so forth. Okay, so now we're going to talk about one more concept, and that is we need to be able to ask the user some questions, right? Because it gets pretty boring if all we're doing is writing out literals. So we need to be able to ask the user some questions and do something with the answer. So that's our next topic. All right, so how do we gather input from the user? Well, this is not something that a lot of times you'll do in a web page. You don't have most of your own web pages doing this, but for writing scripts, we kind of need it, right? We kind of need a way to ask the user a question and to do something with the answer. The function that we're going to use is called prompt. And prompt says, ask the user a question and return whatever they give us as the answer. Prompt needs two parameters, always two parameters. The first parameter is, what is the text that you want the user to see? Right? So in this case I said enter account balance. I want them to see that in the little box that comes up. There's going to be a little tiny dialog box and it's going to say enter account balance. The next thing is going to be, what do you want to see as the default in that box? The user's going to get to type, but if you think that there's a really common answer that you want to supply so that they don't have to actually type it, they could just say okay, you can provide that as a default. Now, if you don't have a default, you still should provide the two quotes, but you don't put anything in between them, not even a space. You just say quote, quote. That's an empty string, and that says, I don't really have a default here, just let the user type. We're going to practice that in a minute. All right, so let's go and do a little practice with that using our starter script. So I'm going to just take our starter script and open it in Notepad++. Here we go. Here we have our hello world. So in our case, let us change this document.write. I'm going to get rid of that, or maybe I'll just comment it out by putting 2 slashes in front of it. That's a way to comment something out in JavaScript. Doesn't work in HTML. It only works in JavaScript. You can only use it inside the script block right here. Okay, so let's use the prompt command and let's ask the user their name. Notice I type open and close parentheses, always with functions, and then I'm always going to put 2 sets of quotes. Right? One set of quotes is going to be the prompt. So I'm going to say enter your name. Right? Don't worry about the autocomplete, just hit escape if you want to ignore it. Now, what would you type in for the default for a name? I'm not sure we can really come up with something. Like, it's not like we're going to say, well, most people's name is Biff, so we'll just put Biff. In this case, we really don't have a good default, so we're just going to leave it as is. Right? Now, how's that going to work? Let's save that. Notice I'm just going to press the save key, Control S, or we're going to save it there, and then I'm going to go run it, and I'll just launch it in Firefox. That's going to be the default that I'm going to use. So watch what happens. It says enter your name. Oh, great. Notice there's nothing in the box because we put nothing in those second quotes, and I can say my name is Bill Barry. And then I can say OK. There we go. So the script has run. It asked me for my name, and everything is cool. Now I don't have to exit this browser, by the way. I'm going to show you this workflow later, but I'm just going to minimize it because I can just come back without having to do anything with that. In fact, what I might want to do is I might want to throw this thing to the left-hand side of the screen and this thing to the right side of the screen so I can keep running it. And so this is a fairly common way to put the things side by side. All right. Now, so prompting lets you do that. Make another change. How about enter your age, or enter customer balance? Let's try that one. Enter balance, and then maybe we'll say the default is 0.0 because maybe most customers when they're entering our system don't have a balance. I save that with Control S. I come back here, and now I'm just going to refresh the script, which I can do with the icon here. I can do Control R. I can do F5, whatever you want to do. I'll do F5. Notice now when the script runs, it says enter balance, and 0.0 came up. But it is highlighted. So if I wanted to, I could just say OK, but also I could just type, right? Since it's highlighted, I can just type a new balance. I don't even have to select it. I just say $235.89, right? And once you say OK, that is going to return that information to the script. All right? Great. So that kind of gives us a sense of what's going on there and how the prompt command works, right? So that's how you can ask the user a question. Now, interesting follow-on thing is, what can we do with that answer? Because right now, we ask the user the question, and remember, when you call a function, it's going to replace this whole thing with the result of that. The result of it is 0.0 or 2348 or whatever it is, or my name, but we didn't do anything with it. So if it just replaces this whole thing, I've actually just discarded it, right? I haven't done anything with it yet. So that's kind of important. So let's introduce one other concept to remind you of one other concept, and then we'll see how to use it somewhere. Just realize that it is perfectly okay to use one function inside another function. And if you've ever used Microsoft Excel, you certainly have seen something like that. For instance, you could write a function in Excel that said equals round payment, blah, 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 blah. Well, what does this actually do? Well, we are calling a payment function inside and then a round function outside. Because this is inside the parentheses, it has to be done first. So it's going to calculate a payment on a loan, let's say, at 2.9% divided by 12 months. So that's the annual interest rate divided by 12 for 48 months. And I'm starting in the hole $35,000. I'm borrowing $35,000. So that's going to go out and calculate exactly what the payment would be. But then it's going to replace this whole expression with the result of that, however many dollars that turns out to be. But that's got some icky stuff after the decimal that we don't want. So we can take that result and we can round it to 2 decimals. So that is how a nested function works. One function inside the other function. It does the inside one, and then it moves using that result to the outer ones. And you can nest them very deep. If you've studied Excel, you know that that can happen. So that's what this does, right? Finds this, finds the answer, then it evaluates the whole thing with that answer, that result in place, and comes up with whatever the result is. Great. So now, how can we put that to use in our JavaScript? Well, we can do a couple of different things. For instance, we could, for instance, call the prompt command, the prompt function, and say enter your age, and then we could take that whole thing and convert it to a number. Right, so that's one thing that we could do with nesting, right? We could take the age that was entered and turn it into a number. And then, of course, you could continue on and do something else with it. Here's one that's very common, one that you need right away. You ask them for some information, and then once it has the information back, it's going to replace this thing, and then we're just going to want to write it. Now, we got to be really careful about the parentheses, and Notepad++ will help us. Notice open 1, open 2, close the second one, close the first one. We got to have these things nested properly. Always watch the things that go in pairs. You got a quote here and a quote here, a quote here and a quote here, parentheses here, parentheses there, parentheses here, parentheses there. It's the most kind of common error to put to have the wrong number of parentheses or have them in the wrong spot. So just watch that. So let's go back to our script and let's take a look at what's going on with that, and we'll keep this thing up. All right. So let's say that we wanted to let's go back to enter name. Enter your name, and we don't really have a default, so we're just going to leave that out. Check your parentheses, and notice that Notepad++ will help. When I click by this parenthesis, it will show the corresponding one here. Notice it turned that one green and bold, and this one now is green and bold. So we know that that's the matching parenthesis. So now, what do we want to do with that? Well, we want to take that whole thing and we want to write it out. So I'm going to say document.write. I'm going to open parentheses here, and then I'm going to go to the end of the line because I want to take that whole result and I want to match that. So notice I typed that parenthesis and it showed that this was the open that goes with it. And the prompt is now inside of that. So it has to do the prompt first, return whatever the user said, and then write it out to the screen with a document.write. Now, JavaScript is a free-form language. If I want, I can do this. All right? It's okay to put things on different lines. Be a little bit careful where you put that enter. I wouldn't put it in the middle of a word, and I wouldn't put it in the middle of a quoted string. But within reason, you can put things on different lines if you need to see them, like I did right here. But that's just a little side piece of information. Okay, so if you needed to see it all, you could see it that way. Okay, so now let me save that. Let me come over here and run it. And I'm going to put, what is your name? Bill Berry. I'm going to hit enter. And notice, lo and behold, Bill Berry, there it comes out onto the web page because I document.write. I wrote that out using document.write, and I put the result of the prompt. Let's do the second one. Document.write, open parentheses. I'm going to put it on the new line, prompt, open parentheses, enter balance. Right, close quote, close parentheses. I don't want to close yet. I want to always put my second thing, right? And then I close this quote, and notice again, watch what happens. When I type this close parenthesis, it's going to show that the document.write one lights up, so I can see that that's matched, right? Now here, maybe I put a balance of 0.0, right? Maybe I can do that. So now come back here, I saved it. I do this without even thinking, Control S, come back over here, run it with F5, enter your name, Bill Berry. enter balance. Notice I get this 0.0. I can type in a new value. I can hit enter, and the stuff comes out. All right. Now, it's squished together. Yes, it is. We'll learn to do something about that soon. Yes, we will. Now, this is a little bonus piece of content that your brain may or may not be ready for, but notice we might actually want to say Bill Barry's balance is, or we might want to put some other text there. And if so, we can certainly concatenate information on here, but where it goes might be a little bit confusing. So I think I'm not going to go further than that. I'm just going to say we'll learn a lot about how to make that prettier soon. And I'll give you one quick tip to put them on separate lines. I'll tell you one HTML tag that will be very useful, and I will put it here and then we'll talk about it. Okay. If we were writing in HTML, we would just be able to write this tag as a normal HTML tag. But since we're writing in the script, right, since we're in the middle of the script and we are talking to the web page a little bit long distance, right, we have to send it out to the web page, this has to be a quoted literal piece of text, and in it we put the break tag. The break tag is an empty tag that doesn't have a close. There's no slash break, right? It's just BR space slash in angle brackets. And when you do that, you're saying, I want a line break. I want you to move to the next line, please. So if I have that in here and I save my script and I come over here and I run it, it's going to say enter your name, Bill Barry, enter your balance, put something in. Notice that now they go over 2 lines. So this is an example of us sending things to an HTML page, and in this case sending an HTML tag out to the web page at the same time. So that's kind of useful. All right, so let us go back to the slides and see if there's anything else interesting to cover. I think we've covered everything here on nested functions, so that's great. There's some challenges, but I will ignore those for here because we'll do them in class. So let's see what else we have. There's more challenges. All right, so last thing that you'll find in some of these decks is a series of resources, and there are some links here if you want to learn more. This is kind of detailed information, but if you're sort of geeking out over assembly language and some of the stuff about how languages came to be, you might find it useful. That brings us to the end of this lesson and the end of this video series. Thanks so much for watching these, and if you have questions, as usual, send them an email, post them on our discussion forum, or in some other way that you find convenient, and online or in person when we see each other next. Thanks for watching.